Okay, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. My name is Irvan and I want to describing or reviewing the book that I have read before. That is Language Assessment Principle by H. Douglas Brown. Okay, let's get started. Uh, in this book, Brown is trying to show us that in the world of teaching, we have a lot of different things we do. When we teach, but a big part of that is assessment. And if you think about that, when we every time we talk to our students or nearly every time or even to children or coworkers, when we are trying to teach something, we reflexively almost have assessed formally in our informally if they are picking up what we are trying to teach them, and a smaller part of that is testing, but it is all part of teaching. Teaching is not separate from assessment, and assessment is not separate from teaching. That means good teaching includes authentic and intrinsically motivating assessment procedures that are appropriate for their context and designed to offer constructive feedback to students. So, and throughout the class, I just want to start with this framework rather than maybe some of the rhetoric in the public sphere about how terrible testing is for students. That is not we are going to focus on. Uh, we're going to talk about what is a text, what is a test, what is the main function of the assessment, focusing on summative, informative, and then I want to talk about four principles or qualities of assessment: practicality, reliability, validity, and beneficial consequence. And I want to be focused on those because that is what we are going to focus on. Well, Brown defines test is a method of measuring a person's ability, knowledge, or performance in a given domain. Seems like a short definition, but let's break it down. A method has to be an instrument or a set of techniques or procedure or times this must be explicit and structured. What do I mean by that? Multiple choices question have to prescribe correct answer of a writing prompt with a scoring rubric and interviewing a checklist, right? It has to be clear and structured that the method matches with what we are going to do. It must be explicit and structured in a design. Why so? Measuring, we are going to measure something, a person's ability, knowledge, or performance. Let's focus on a person first. We have to understand who our test takers are, and what are their previous experience in this test relevant to the test's abilities, and then it is a match for it plausible, right? It is very important in this course to know who the context, who the students are, what the context is. We can't really evaluate an assessment until we know who is going to be taking it, and from the measuring of a person's ability, knowledge, or performance, we infer that person's competence. We really can ever directly measure incompetent competence. We can only measure that performance or the knowledge based on their performance on the test. And then the last part here in a given domain, and what I mean there is it could be very general, like I want to measure the person's language proficiency, or it could be very uh, and you might choose specific items to measure that, trying to see what will represent their global proficiency, or it might be very specific, like just their writing skill or just their pronunciation skills. Okay, so two big functions of the assessment for summative is maybe what most people think of when they think of an assessment, and the goal is to measure or summarize what the student has learned and this result can be used to make placement decisions, college acceptance, letter grades, passing, failing this, like that. For formative assessment, that the goal is to evaluate the students who are in the process of forming their company competencies and skill in order to help them to continue to improve. The stress is more on giving appropriate feedback on the in performance to have future learning. So if you were to do a figure or some sort of concept map, what might that look like to help us remember formative and summative? Well, I like to use uh, informative. The assessment is looking forward into what the future learning should be. In business, you might hear people saying like plan, do, and check. Right, we make a plan, we do it, we check it, and then we repeat the cycle. Right, we want to check to uh, keep learning that going on the right course. So to think summative assessment, we are looking backwards at what learning had happened, and formative assessment is the assessment is taking place today to think about what we need to do tomorrow or even in the next minute or in the next afternoon. And let's see, we're gonna be talking about the qualities of effective assessment a lot in the course, and here are practically reliability, validity, and beneficial consequence. We are going to talk about each of them in their turn, but I like to first explain in this figure. Is reliability and practicality. I think practicality is the most important because the absolute perfect test that nobody can afford, or nobody has time to give, or the students don't have time or resources to take it, won't ever be you. So it has to be practical. We are all very busy, so practicality can be defined as the difference between resource available and the resource required to develop and use the assessment. And we are going to be very practical in this class, and think about how we as classroom instructors do we have time to create and use the test, and how long will that take, and how long will it take to conduct the test and things like that. Because if it's practical, it is going to go. No, the next one is reliability. Some book talks about it, as if it will be consistent, right? If two students with an A and level 4, they should be both equally prepared for level 5 if the assessment in your class are reliable. If the student takes it on Monday and they take the same exam on Tuesday, it should be it's reliable. Reliable test. If they get the statistically similar scores, so reliable consistency, then there is a validity, which is a little bit more difficult concept to discuss. We are going to talk about that. In it, the test measure the construct that we want it to be measuring, and then the top one for our purposes for this class is beneficial consequence. And we're going to use that. Brown doesn't use that term specifically. He used a lot of different terms that kind of all encompass this. So for instance, he used consequential validity, and that he defines that as all the consequence or the impact, the effect of the testing on the teaching and the learning. And I like to think about that as a preparation of the test takers, right? This the teachers lead students in lesson and test and discussion all to move them to be ready to take assessment. But this can also be student led, right? Knowing that a test is coming up, they might study and things like this. Another term we have a whole bunch. The other terms that Brown uses is washback and feedback in authenticity, and these are going to go into the idea of beneficial consequence. Okay, so let's focus on washback here. Washback is effects of testing on the teaching and learning again. This also sounds like preparation, and this can be negative like teaching to the test, but since we're calling this beneficially consequence, I want to focus here on how knowing how you are going to be assessed has a positive effect on your learning. And I want to give this example when I was teaching a course for uh, there was a lot of practice in pronunciation because that is their hope. They want to pass the pronunciation, and one of the teachers, the other teachers, did a small experiment where she talked, and the students how refused to spend a lot of time reviewing the rubric of how they would be assessed on their pronunciation, and she had them self-assess and really get used to the rubric, and they found that had a lot of washback on their actual pronunciation. So again, it's going to be a beneficial consequence if you know how they are going in. If I'm going to be assessed, I would like to know how I'm going to be assessed, and knowing how I'm going to be tested will probably likely help me in my performance. Okay, so another beneficial consequence of assessment is feedback, right? We want to give feedback that increase the chance that the student will learn and authenticity. We there has been a big trend that we want language assessment to be authentic, and we can do that by thinking about what will this language learner need to do, when would the language learner or when would do skill X in the real world, and then how might we assess it in the classroom. And this has come about a lot with the use of performance based assessment. Okay, so those are the four qualities of effective assessment that we are going to be focusing on: practicality, reliability, validity, and beneficial consequence. Okay, I think it is enough from me. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.